and this is the Silver Spook panel on post-colonial games. Not everybody is quite here yet, but we have a very fun panel and should be educational panel for all of us. That's about we have several indigenous game devs and other indie devs and Afrofuturists and Pan Africanists here as well to talk about this very interesting topic and to also share all of our games that we're all working on. Meagan or Santo, either one, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I can go first. So, my name is Santo. I am a game designer currently based in Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, formerly based out of Toronto, and I've been making games since like 2014. And I specialize in making games around like themes of like Guarani spirituality and community values. And lately, I've been focusing more on indigenous futurisms and cyberpunk. And I'm working on a game called Cyber Triple R Revolution, which is a game that kind of looks at different aspects of indigenous cyberpunk expressed through like different lenses of Guarani culture that are present primarily in this central part of South America. And yeah, I excited to talk a little bit more about this. I've been on a couple of panels in the past, and yeah, always looking forward to discussing more about indigenous futurism and post apocalypse.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. Good to have you back on. Megan, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Hansi, Meagan Byrne, Apatuaco Sisan, Hamilton, Ontario, Nuchin. Hi, my name is Meagan Byrne. I'm Apatuaco Sisan, or Métis of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I reside in Hamilton, which is Treaty 3, or Between the Lakes Treaty. And I run Atmos Taoistan Games, which is a majority Indigenous staffed video game company. And we're actually working on our first major commercial project, Hill Agency, which I've actually been working on since 2017, just trying to get it out there. So that'll be out sometime this year, and I can't talk about much more because I promised other people I wouldn't until June.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, full disclosure, I'm an ultra fan of this thing. I've been following this game forever. I'm like I'm your number one poster on Reddit. No, I
Yeah.
I retweet every no. Megan is I've been following seriously though this game for a long time, and it's really been not only just following it just because I want to play it, which I am looking forward to possibly playing some of the demo versions in the near future, but also I was an inspiration behind Neofeud 2, which is my game. And I apologize, I'm playing weird Tetris with my own face in the middle of this talk. But I'm trying to... Anyways, so Neofeud 2 is my game that has drawn inspiration from... actually, all of these devs here. Santo, Megan, and I've also talked to Saber about a lot of different things and book recommendations. Yeah, it's been a lot of cross-pollination across the indigenous planet in game devs specifically. And for Neofeud 2, the thing that I really liked about Atrimo Games is Atrimo Stawanan Games Hill Agency is the incorporation of the indigenous language, indigenous heritage and culture, and just like the art. Even like you look at that image, and it's like it's right. It's visibly recognizably, especially to indigenous peoples, it is recognizably, like an indigenous game. Umurangi Generation is another one that comes immediately to mind. Another person, Umurangi folks have been several times on my the panels, Naftali Faulkner specifically, and so it's like I really appreciated that. And with Neofit 1, it's been like a very oh man, there's so many things wrong with the colonial world, being inside of the U.S. state of Hawaii, occupation of Hawaii, etc. in basically New York in the tropics, and that's been like it's always been kind of a Neofield One is kind of like a looking at it from cautionary cyberpunk dystopian tale about what's wrong. I just got finished watching Severance, which is like The Matrix as a TV show, or Brazil and The Matrix all as a TV show. It's a very office, getting lost in the kind of the cubicle hell, and having your mind and your information of what's actually happening being just being severed off from what you're working on, who you're working for, the financial rewards of the produce of what you're working on, and having no idea what, and and being separated from other people. And so like for Neofield is kind of very much like that. It's a very Mr. Anderson game, for being inside there. And then and Neofield 2 is kind of like after Morpheus gets you out and like, okay, what is this thing that we're outside of? What is this thing that we've been inside of, or I've been inside of? And so Neofield 2 has very much been inspired by things like I jump all over the history and science fictional reality when I talk, but it's definitely like inspired by the actual indigenous reality that I had been like disconnected from in a lot of ways, in my own upbringing, like, which is similar for a lot of people. I just applied to join the Imaginative Festival as well. So to my other game, Decolonators will be, like yesterday night, I was like, everybody kept messaging me and they're like, Silver Spook, you have to put your, I said, I wasn't sure if it was appropriate. And then they said, no, you have to add Decolonators in. And I said, okay. All right then.
Yeah, got it.
Do you want some serious decolonization? I mean, it's not just a little like land acknowledgement. I'm going to tell you that. This is not just like, hey everybody, I'm so sorry I'm on stolen land and now here's some. No, it's like an entire country gets its ass decolonized, and then some empires get their asses handed to them in that game. So if you want, I'll talk about it, but I don't want to like, I don't want. Imaginative is much more based than that. I know. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Anyways, I know it's all these cool people that join my Silver Spook panels. I only bring the most epic people. So these people are all involved in these kind of events. Anyway, I'm BSing right now. So you should talk more about. I'm seriously though. I really do. A lot of the art that's in the Neofield 2 image in the left corner is like, I added that because not like just because, but like it was inspired by things like Hill Agency that had all of these images of Ojibwe characters, if I'm not mistaken. And other
Cree-Syllabic.
Is it Cree-Syllabic? Okay, somebody else said Ojibwe. That was another indigenous researcher, my friend. But I obviously, yeah. So it's like indigenous language and then art and in the front of it, and then Umurangi generation also with like the name itself is actually Umurangi is red sky, and I was like in Native Hawaiian, in our Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian language, Ululani is basically the same word, but it means red sky because we're relative. Yeah. So I was looking it up and I was like, yeah, no, this is. The name of the game is and some people said like, hey, maybe don't other people who are working in games or other fellow industry people were saying maybe just call it Red Sky because it's too confusing for game audiences. They're not gonna, what is Umurangi? Nobody's gonna look at that, then nobody's gonna want to buy it because it's it's like when people say I don't like Terminator Dark Fate because it's full of Spanish. It's got to be in my language. It's got to look and sound and feel like what I want. And so Naftali, I remember he told me once, he said, I thought about it and then I said, but wait, we've been asked to, scrub our language and culture from so much of our own history for the last centuries. Why should I do it for this game? And so anyway, long story short, so all that was a big inspiration for like my current game. And I'm gonna stop talking and let you talk. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, like that point you made though, like about, don't use that, use English. Like maybe that would have flown back in the 80s, maybe the 90s, but like we had a huge weeb culture here in like North America and English speaking areas, and they can just like roll Japanese off their tongue, no problem. Kids who don't speak a word of it. So I don't buy for a second that they can't learn how to say these things and that they wouldn't have I don't see anyone complaining about these words. I really don't. I think people are excited to see something like this, to like actually hear traditional or just to hear our language. But I don't know. What was it that one guy said like way back? Like if they can pronounce Schwarzenegger, they can learn to say your words.
Yeah, and I think that like it also kind of invites people to like play the game to find out more. Like, what does that word exactly mean and what's the context that it's being used in? And that's something that I also think about quite a bit because, like, when it comes to the game I'm currently working on, I want to localize it to Guarani at some point because it is like a language that is spoken enough that there's like a lot of resources for it to like translate scripts and translate things. And obviously I have members of my family who speak it fluently, so they also know like the different kind of like nuances of the dialects because there's different dialects in different regions. But that's also another thing that I think about, that like it's like when thinking in a business sense, it doesn't make for the best business case, but it is something that I want to do because like I want to just have it in that language that my grandmother and my mom grew up speaking, and uh, to do it as like something that I personally think will be really interesting and um, like interesting to do in the sense that I'm also like refreshing my own knowledge of the language and trying to like polish up my grammar a little bit. And yeah, trying to kind of own up to that in the development process.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely like a thing that you can see it coming through. Even like my own like my language. I'm like well, Hawaiian was banned when I was born, so in Hawaii. So I'm gonna use that as like, my mom is afraid to speak the language. So I'm pretty removed from a lot of like specifically the language learning. My sister actually teaches now Hawaiian is a little more spoken. It's like 20 to 30,000 speakers. But in the 80s, there were less than 50 children who spoke Hawaiian. It was almost extinct, completely extinct. So it's really been a process trying to reclaim it from that. I'm speaking of post-colonial, it's like still just trying to get a little less colonial for me has been a challenge. It's been a process, and trying to figure out what is the colonial, what isn't, and recapturing the language was very important because it's stuff that's like in Neophyte 2 specifically. It's like I'm like I wanted to have some parts of the game that's like very much about giving people there's a fictional science fictional alien race, but they're deeply Asian and Pacific because I'm indigenous Asian and indigenous Pacific Islander both. Technically, I have heritage that goes back to Choctaw, but I'm not like connected to that in a way that I'm practicing it. But like I'm connected to like multiple Asian and Pacific Islander. They like API month, but there's like there's barely any PIs, number one, and all the Asians are still getting mass killed and stuff. So they don't really care too much about all those people, that was another reason why I was a little worried about decolonizers. But anyways, so for my Asian and Pacific heritage, I wanted that to be infused into the game in a way that I wasn't able to do it. But I was like, I can't really do this unless I didn't feel confident, to be honest. I thought about doing like Neophyte more like in Hawaii. Like it's Coastlandia. It's just a kind of generic disembodied Los Angeles crossed with South African slum crossed with like the worst part of London, it in a science fictional setting. But I didn't really know how to really do what I wanted to do. But it kind of took the last 5 years of recapturing, and part of that was recapturing language so that I could know and the art and what the meanings of the symbols even were. Like even the history of Hawaii. A lot of the last year or 2 years has been like going through an actual history of Hawaii. I mean, not the Western. I mean, state, government, or university system, because I didn't learn anything about Hawaii from the universities of the United States, to be completely honest. It was actually rogue educators. Some of them were like Instagram self-funded. Give me $50 a month. I hope I can get a $1,500 on Patreon so I can pay my rent and keep digging through ancient archives that the U.S. hasn't incinerated, so that I can find out about this ancient or this 1800 socialist super advanced Hawaiian civilization that got Bolivia. And when I say Libya and Bolivia, I mean it got forced U.S. back couped and militarily invaded. Hawaii is technically undergoing an military invasion as we speak. And so all that stuff is like not taught, it's not taught in public school. I went to a $20,000 a year private school because my dad taught there. And, but they don't teach anything, and they teach like negative things about the truth of Hawaii, especially Hawaii for reasons. And so that was a long journey, and then trying to integrate that with the language into the game was it was a real kind of, it was hard. Like I remember, like I've been writing a lot of science fiction and cyberpunk for a while. Like I've like ghost written for some people, possibly William Gibson. I'm not going to confirm or deny that, but I definitely interviewed that guy, Mr. Cyberpunk 2077's godfather of cyberpunk. But I've done a lot of that kind of North American and European science fiction, cyberpunk, and dystopian writing. So that's like comes naturally to me. What didn't come naturally was trying to write stories about being a Native Hawaiian or Asian Pacific Islander from a post-colonial or from a non-colonial perspective. That was very hard, actually, and it's still hard. But I'm having to learn a lot, which is good because I don't want to just be the same person I was 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. And so, but anyway, yeah. But anyways, any of you can pick that up because I feel like I've been talking too long, and take that wherever you want.
Well, what you mentioned about like having to kind of get that um, deeper history is something that I think a lot of us go through, but I also understand like that kind of process where trying to dig through like colonial propaganda to find like what is actually like historical and true. Because a lot of times it the way it gets taught and gets wrapped up, it like tells a totally different story that didn't quite happen that way, or like there's some uh, truths that are hidden, or some others that are like really stretched to tell something else. And in like researching stuff, I kind of like there's a lot of books about like Paraguayan and like Brazilian history, but sometimes it tends to romanticize the process of like colonization quite a bit, where it tells that, oh, like the local like indigenous nations were like friendly to the like Portuguese and Spanish settlers, when like in order to say that they were like submissive or they were kind of like pacifist, and they just allowed the settlers to kind of colonize them, when that wasn't the case, obviously. And trying to kind of like dig through that and find actual accounts from like different indigenous communities of like what their version history is as well. Like an icon in kind of like Guarani communities in Paraguay is there's this kind of a story about in La India Juliana, which is like a Guarani woman who's called Juliana, who like rose up and basically like kind of started I don't know what the right word is here, kind of started a revolt against like the Spanish, because she killed a man that she was forcefully married to, and that has been something that has been shared through like a very long time as a kind of like an icon and a person to like inspire indigenous women to like carry on that history, and to also find strength in that history as well. Like India Juliana is like a very emblematic symbol. Like she gets printed on a lot of like shirts, and a lot of like indigenous peasant marches feature her as like a kind of like a prominent figure. So finding those kind of like culturally relevant and important histories is also really important to like understand the ways in which like colonial history teaches things that are not true, or are not entirely actually factual.
Yeah, it can be kind of tricky, and yeah, I'm glad you brought up like the the peasant, this kind of other history that doesn't really paint, it doesn't really paint it, the peasant like uprisings and such, and the things that don't really paint the current power structure that you're under in, or the government, etc., and the businesses, and the settlers, also just the random people who are very uncomfortable like when you kind of bring up this history. it's it's not convenient. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to think if you're just an average, a U.S. citizen or Canadian citizen, or even as somebody who's just a member of the state of Hawaii but is not tied to Hawaiian culture. Even like my dad, he's more Hawaiian, and I bring it up all the time, but he's more Asian and Pacific Islander than anything else. But he identifies as a white man, because his culture was eradicated out of him, and so I will argue with him about whether there's been any residential schools at all. Like he's super down to defend the Catholic Church to the death, And I'm like, Dad, you're like one of those people who had their culture genocided. We just found that Kamehameha Schools, one of the biggest schools in the United States, was a boarding school, was an Indian genocidal boarding school, and it's like right there. Your Catholic schools in Hawaii, Dad. Your mom. I don't want to speak too much specifically because we've all there's a lot of and we all know. I hope people, all of us in this chat, speaking these traumas, but my family, your wife had the Hawaiian forcibly, violently removed from her, and you're defending these people, and so so it can be very difficult, and he doesn't want to hear about it. He doesn't want to hear about what happened. He doesn't want to hear. He wants the Hawaiianness to be kind of like a token. I'm a quarter Hawaiian. How cool is that? But I'm basically an American. That's what he wants. He wants to consume his own identity, like a liberal in New York, or reading a book, or watching watching his own plastic cellophane Hawaiian luau dance. It's this really weird thing, and that's anyway. So that's been really a challenge, and it's been a challenge to kind of like figure out, how do you tell this? Who am I telling the story to? Number one, and I know Meagan. I want to spin this off, so I'm not talking, and I want Meagan to talk more. Is that article that you wrote? It was in I forget the exact name of it. I'm sure Holly, my partner, will get that in the chat shortly. But there was this article where Meagan, you were being interviewed about about who the game is for. I mean, there's lots of things. I read that entire article on one of my recent streams. Actually, it took me like 4 hours because I go on a lot of tangents in case it's not already apparent. And I read like 3 sub articles. The one about Horizon Forbidden West, and then Prey, and all these things. I was actually I made an entire video about Prey as well, as a gold as my idea of what's a gold standard of indigenous representation in a video game from like 2006, the 2006 Prey. But anyways, so like that, in that article you talk about like how this game, I didn't really necessarily, the audience that I was kind of thinking of was other indigenous people, and this game is not necessarily for the global or the Western or the English speaking audience. One of many important things that came up in that article, I think it was Mobile Syrup is the site. Yeah. And anyways, so yeah, I mean, we want to talk a little bit about that, like what went into those decisions regarding Hill Agency.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things about why I stuck with Hill Agency, beyond just, I love the genre, I love writing this kind of stuff, is it was, how to phrase this, the most indigenous looking thing I could do without it feeling tokenized. So like, I was very, very early on in my career, I was very definitely, I don't want to say pressured, encouraged. And this is like, this is also within indigenous art spaces, but like encouraged to play up the indigeneity. And while I was like, well, I don't know how much more indigenous I can get than what I am, what I started to realize by the play that up, it was a very specific concept of what that was, what that indigeneity looked like, which I started calling like, does it read like it's native? And then what kind of native? And people kind of compartmentalize in their head, like, oh, there's like, Hawaiian native looks like this, and most American natives look like this, and Canadian and Northern natives look like this, and then that's like that's all you get. And as I was working on this, and now I work with another artist, since the original artist had to leave the project, Scatahonas Esquivel, who is an amazing Mohawk and Mexican artist. He's done comic books, he's done games, he worked on the Saw series. He's actually responsible for doing a lot of the trap designs.
Oh wow.
and environments for the original Saw games. And you know, the more we were working on it, the more I was kind of talking with other Indigenous people. They were like, "This just feels like my neighborhood. Like this sounds like my neighborhood. It kind of looks like my neighborhood, or like a really nice version of it. This is how my uncle talks. This is how my cousins talk." And the more we worked on it, the more I was like, yeah, this is us. This, you know, specifically Anishinaabe, Six Nations, the kind of the lakes, the Five Fingered Lakes area. You know, this is how we talk. This is how we kind of visualize our families and our family structures, and this is kind of just what I'd really like my neighborhood to look like. And that was the thing about Hill Agency, is it's a 15-minute into the future kind of piece where you're like, it's barely futurism. Maybe like you got some holograms and some robots. But that's because like I really wanted to make a space that's like, I want to live here. Like I would really like to live here. And I'm kind of tired. Like I use the term post-apocalyptic, even though I feel like we're still living in post-apocalyptic, you know, wiped out by who knows what, and then hit by settlers. And now we're still in the process of recovering after that. And so we're not even in the post-post. And reason I said post-apocalyptic, because it was like, it's not over. It's not over. That was the one thing I think just drove home about today for so many Indigenous people, is like, it's not over yet. We're not on the other side of it. We have only begun to heal. And that's like a long time to be kind of holding on a lot of generational trauma. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this game. And what I realized, like, the way we kind of are presenting things and writing things is like, there are going to be a lot of non-Indigenous people who are going to love this game, and tons of it's going to fly over their head. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That was me in anime. That was me in manga. Like lots of stuff flying over my head. There was stuff that I absolutely loved that was coming out of men and women in Japan who had grown up in the 90s and had kind of gone through this insane cultural shift in the way people were treated at work, and their sort of anger, and how it was coming across in these like this manga. And I was consuming this manga, consuming their anger, not getting it, but getting that there was something there. And kind of the more I got into it, the more I was like, this is very similar to what I'm doing, or what I'm seeing in Indigenous games. Is I am talking directly to people like me who are going through the same stuff like me. That being said, that story is going to resonate regardless. It's going to resonate with other people in other cultures all over the world, because that's what happens with stories. Is like you might not be able to be getting the whole thing because you're not getting all the nuance. Well, you know, it's like looking at a painting. Like you're just, we're really close to it, so we can see all those details, and we're picking up all up these nuance. But like everybody else is like 6 feet back, trying to peer over the crowd, and they're seeing it, but they're not seeing it the way we would see it. And I think that's how I think about what I wanted to do here and why I wanted to craft it the way I did.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, the making games that, you know, your own community, you know, the people around you kind of going like, wait, no, that is actually how, you know, because, you know, even myself, you know, I was saying kind of like my dad sees, you know, you're talking, this is Hawaiianness, and that's what Hawaiianness looks like. It looks like people in a mud hut, half naked, and paddling a canoe, and maybe they do a little shake their hips with a grass skirt, and that's Hawaiianness. Like that's Hilton Hawaiian Village, that's Waikiki, and that's ancient Hawaii, and that's all the Hawaii. That's all you're gonna get, and it's kind of like, you know, is that similar to, you know, my dad, like he likes some of the myths. He'll be like, he's a storyteller, you know, he's like a hippie storyteller, you know, he's like picking probably he used to tell like native, you know, First Nations U.S. myths too, and then one of them happened to be Hawaii because, you know, he's you know, but then there's this other kind of just like resort consumer Hawaii, kind of like the casino indigenous, you know, go to your Indian casino in somewhere in America, experience, and there's a whole thing that where they have to perform that version, right? And like just act like an Indian while I gamble and play the slot machine for all the colonizers showing up to do whatever, have their Vegas, right? And yeah, that sort of things like these kind of games like Umurangi and Hill Agency and and Cyber Art Revolution, obviously, like we'll get to that also. I want to talk more about that, but thinking about and I mean Reservation Dogs is one of those shows that's like and also before that there's a movie that Taika Waititi, who is an indigenous Maori show creator, and like Thor Ragnarok, such minuscule projects such as Thor Ragnarok and What We Do in the Shadows. And Taika is an indigenous person, but he's also a super nerd. That guy is incredibly nerdy. He's actually invited to we're going to do an alt goth POC panel soon, and he's also invited to wear either his 18th century dandy vampire What We Do in the Shadows get up, because he's a vampire. He's a Blade and Underworld and Twilight nerd. Or Taika can wear his Mad Max get up from what Our Flag Means Death, indigenous asymmetrical biker jacket wearing pirate captain who's also Maori master navigator, Blackbeard. Anyways, so Taika's movie though that was like really, I just recently watched it. I don't know why I haven't watched it. Was a movie called Boy, which is kind of about kind of what you're talking about, which is kind of like being not fully out of the colonization, like kind of like just kind of experiencing all kind of other weird culture. Like he's a young boy in the movie Boy. He's a young indigenous Maori kid on in the res like sort of situation, not so good economic situations. He's just like an island, like me. Everybody looks like me, or it looks like it could be anywhere in like the Hawaiian area, like the more Hawaiian homestead areas and like just the local areas in Hawaii. And his dad is like wants to be a samurai and also dancing. He's trying to dance like Michael Jackson. He's watching he's watching all the the 70s and 80s action movies, and his brother thinks he's a superhero, and he's like but he's on the reservation, right? And it's just, that's just part of growing up is you're exposed to all of this content from around the world. I mean, like being exposed to anime, right? I mean, like we're all exposed to all of this stuff, and we don't get all of it, but we relate to some of it. And sometimes it's more positive, sometimes it's more negative. Like you watch too many Captain Star Spangled Underpants, and you decide you're going to sign up for the U.S. military. Like his boy's dad, is named, all of his dad and his uncle and his brother's dad's siblings are named after one of the wars that his parents' generation fought in. So one of them is named Libya. His granddad fought in Libya. One of the dads is named Alamein. One of them is named like Syria and Iraq. That's the Maori kids' names are literally the places where the dad were sent to war. And that's like a thing. Like that's a thing that like my parents and my parents' generation, like several of them, and my generation, they're also kind of like wrapped up in that as well. That imperial for the Pacific Islanders, and although also for indigenous people in Turtle Island as well, the being wrapped up inside, being simultaneously kind of crushed by, but then also employed by the storm. I mean, that's why I call myself half stormtrooper, like Finn, right? The people in Star Wars who are destroyed the colonized end up becoming overrepresented in the military to go on and harm other people, and so that's a whole other thing that was in Boy. But anyways, all that is all kind of just wrapped up together in a way that if you're watching it, you're like, what the heck? Why am I watching Michael Jackson dances? I want to see Maori people doing their haka, and that's it. Nothing. I don't want to see. I want to see you riding some. It's like I said, they only want to see indigenous people riding whales, talking to the trees, having a conversation with their dead grandma, and maybe dancing a hula, and that's about it, right? But it's like that's not who we are, though. That's not who we are. We've talked about this before, but it is a thing that like that is being indigenous means like making video games and watching Blade 2, and then also planting kalo and our plants, and then also sometimes talking to the ancestors, and then making artificial intelligence in the next 2 minutes for a video game. That's the thing that I do on a regular basis, and spending time with family and trying to pass on whatever we have in a way, like in Reservation Dogs, coming back to that one. The learning is, a lot of it is like experiential. It's not to say we don't do book learning too, but it's like the experiences handed down from from makua to keiki, that's Hawaiian for parent and child, or from family members, and also from from the grandmother that is nature to us is like those are all like integral to their culture, and those are things that are not lost in a 21st century society. They are transformed, they're different, but this kind of like just reducing all of the complexities of being an indigenous Hawaiian or Anishinaabe person, or or indigenous person from anywhere in the world, down to like this little caricature thing. And if you don't fit that little caricature BS version of who you are, basically, there's nothing is anyway. So that's why I appreciate all of these shows, and disproportionately they're being made, as you also mentioned in the article, Meagan, made by indigenous peoples rather than let's say people from Europe, right? Making a movie about 3000 AD, going back to the primal savage ways, and indigenous people worshiping U.S. military for no reason, in games such as Horizon Forbidden West, and that being kind of like, it's like, I think you said, like, if you don't tell the story, if ideally you would bring in people to authentically get input from the indigenous people. I mean, you can also get input and then not listen to it. Be like, hey, can you like, I'm gonna pay you $100. Can you like bless my RPG or my video game so that I can make me look not racist, and then I'm gonna release it. I don't care what you said. Or you can hear the input, right, and then actually take the input. But ideally, you would leave the people whose stories you think you're going to tell to the people themselves to tell. Maybe like fund them, have them some support, if anything. But anyways, yeah. So but yeah, and so similarly for Cyber Art Revolution. I mean, I haven't mentioned that one, but I did like we watched. I've been also watching this game a lot, and how the other thing I liked about it, a lot, is that it integrates the indigenous technology and culture into like the giant mechs, and also I just want to throw this out there because to me it's like one of the most important cyberpunk games. 1870 Cyberpunk Forever. I mean, it's not a huge game, but it is a free game made by Santo that's about literally trying to not be a colonizer asshole. Seeing if you cannot white splain to indigenous people their own stuff and just be a dickhead. So anyways, I didn't really have a point there. I just kind of went in a lot of directions. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. Yeah, I was also gonna touch on a little bit of like what Megan was talking about like creating something that is like genuine to us rather than what settlers imagine indigenous culture as, which you were touching on as well, where something that I'm also looking at while developing CyberR is that a lot of this stuff is like very colloquial, or it's very like informal, like the dialogue that I'm writing and the dialogue that is happening between different characters is very um I had meetings with the narrative designer, and we decided that, like, for example, for the mech route, the two pilots that talk to each other, they're co-pilots, but they're gonna talk to each other like they're just like cousins hanging out. So it's gonna be like very casual, and they're gonna have like a little bit of banter going back and forth, and it's going to be a lot more like cultural in that sense. Whereas like I'm also trying to not and sometimes like this is like my own personal artistic choice, but sometimes I'm just very like protective of the cultural things that I do put into my work or into my games, because I'm always kind of like maybe a little bit afraid or just like skeptical that a settler might interact with my work and then see something cool about it and then decide to like pick that particular aspect and like appropriate it in some way, or like use it without understanding what it actually means, and then like and usually it happens to be something like very special or something that should only be used within a specific context. So in a lot of taking that kind of consideration, I'm also like creating something that is it has like that emotion and feeling into it, and it has that appreciation that you usually get by being like inside of a community, and having that that aspect of being something that, yeah, like that settlers might not understand or might not expect exactly, um, and something that that also involves its like kind of, thinking about the things that like I grew up with and that I like one of the things that see cyber art takes a lot of inspiration after is just like generally anime, and like at least like everyone that I grew up with like loved anime, and like even in like Brazil and Paraguay, like indigenous kids could grow up with access to anime, like love anime, and there's like specific series in South America that like are very beloved that inspire a lot of people to like draw, or like I've even found like I think one time I actually found like fan fiction someone wrote of like um I think it was for like an anime called Saint Seiya, but and it was written by like a Portuguese speaking, I think, Guarani person, and they wrote fan fiction about like inserting their own culture in that series, which is like it was very funny, very interesting because it is something like very like that is more a trend with like younger people of like really liking anime and then making your own thing of it, which I find really neat, and that's also kind of like where my own draw from like anime comes, and specifically like mech stuff like Gundam that have like there's different types of like Gundam seasons that have like very at least for the kind of like scope that it has like some like anti-imperialist like messaging in there of like not just that like war is bad, but like the reasons like that we fight wars are bad, and also that some wars like are fought for survival. And that's also like one of the other things that cyber focuses on is that like it focuses on like that kind of like post-apocalypse or like post-apocalypse period, to show different types of indigenous people kind of like coping with that aftermath, and that like not to say that that post-apocalypse period would be like perfect or everyone's happy now, but to show that in that kind of I guess phase of recovery, like everything is still kind of like sort of bad, but people are kind of finding their own ways to cope with it. Like that post recovery period is not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of figuring things out, and kind of like trying to implement different structures for recovery, and that's kind of like what the game also focuses a lot on. It's just like characters in different ways understanding what this post-apocalypse, post-recovery period means to them, and trying to process it in different ways. So like we have the two pilots who go out and want to recover like a stolen mech that was stolen like during the war. So like their method of like recovery is to like physically take something back. And then there's another character who goes into a town to like meet different characters, and they cope more by like connecting with like a local community and finding more about themselves. And then the third character, who's like a veteran of the war, she focuses more on like, I have my daughter and I have my soon to be granddaughter like to protect, and I need to make sure that their future is secured, and that their future is like prosperous, and that they don't have to deal with like settlers and colonizers and imperialists. Um, but yeah, and that's kind of like a lot of what I'm thinking about and focusing on and working on that game, and um, thinking of like ways to make there's definitely some serious aspects to it, of course, but also finding like the maybe not lighthearted is the right word, but the more like humorous moments of like how indigenous people find humor in like the darkest times, and can still have those conversations with each other while these kind of like awful things are happening.
Um, yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely get the. These are all topics that I feel like there's a lot of dovetails specifically on the finding the humor in the sadness. I mean, that's like people have commented on also on that movie Boy I was talking about. There's like incredibly sad things because I mean, when you're colonialism is, it's the apocalypse. A lot of bad stuff happens and a lot of sadness and suffering and death and not even just physical death, like cultural death happens, and that's sad. And then at the same time, to kind of survive, you need that humor. And I used to kind of think like, am I the only one who makes like not the only one, but I mean, this making these like super satirical hippie Terminators, like in Neophytes, like hippie Terminators, and then there's like little the robo gangsters who are like don't even realize they've been like colonized like robot thugs. They're like but they talk kind of like they talk like my students, but they're like bantering back and forth in like an Abbott Costello way with their social worker, but it's like super sad at the same time. I'm like, but this is I feel like this is actually like a pattern, and especially after watching like Boy and Reservation Dogs, which Reservation Dogs is almost like First Nations in Turtle Island as a TV series. Boy is like the Pacific Island indigenous experience, but they're like it's like the indigenous kid. They say Taika Waititi is actually kind of like this. He's like the kid when everybody's like having a very serious grieving at the funeral. He's the indigenous kid that's like making the jokes, and it's not like he's making fun of the death, but it's like to just keep everybody surviving with some spoons intact kind of. And so I feel like that's I don't think I consciously decided to do that, but like there's incredibly serious things about genocide and police murder, et cetera, et cetera. There's some serious scenes, but it's like filled with all this humor as well to kind of like leaven that bread so you don't completely I don't want people to I remember thinking I don't want people to like start this game. I'm going to give them the full force of my personal experiences as a native Hawaiian in the ghetto, and I'm like I don't want people to like instead of rage quit, they like depress quit my game. I gotta have people like get through this, so I want to put a lot more humor in it, but at the same time I'm not gonna like it's not like a comedy in the sense of the way that comedy is in like I don't know, I don't want to throw shade at Ben Stiller because I just watched this Severed, but it's kind of like 90s and noughties comedies by Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, mainstream movies. The comedy is like, isn't it funny that he farted, or that's a sexual something, that's an innuendo. Sometimes it's a lot of kind of gross punching down that's super canceled now and for good reason. A lot of arse, the comedy is like ha ha ha, look at that, it's a person who has disabilities, ha ha ha, that's a ha ha ha, like I got drunk, and the indigenous comedy is like, oh shit, we all got wiped out, but we got you back, motherfucker, I survived. Like it's like, oh my god, it's incredibly sad, but also it's funny at the same time, and it's often more punching up, I think, because we're down, and so it is kind of like it's not like a shooting. Decolonizers is where there's a shooting war, and the colonizers get decolonized out of Vietnam, but sometimes it's more cultural and other ways of resisting, and one of them is actually through cultural storytelling, and a lot of that is comedy and kind of dunking on a lot of this kind of stuff in a way that is positive ultimately. And anyways, I'm just kind of rambling now, so yeah.
Yeah, like for us, I mean, I do have stuff that's humorous, but I think a lot of what I chose to lean into was just like the cheese of noir writing, like that bad pulp novel that you're reading at the bus station. Like, I trying to do that on purpose, which isn't necessarily like meaning I'm purposely writing bad. It's more like it is really rough, some of the stuff that we bring up. Like the main conceit is this woman has shown up and her sister has just been murdered, and you don't really want to deal with this because you kind of have trauma from like things that have happened, and you don't really want to deal with. Oh, did something happen?
Oh, it might just be an echo on
Oh, okay. Yeah, like you don't, you as the player, but also kind of like me as the writer, being an indigenous person, be like, really, if that was me, I would not want to deal with that. I got my trauma. I don't want to deal with that. And part of the writing, I hope people pick up on, maybe not, is that you're essentially role playing as somebody with PTSD. And like I suffer from PTSD, and I was tired of PTSD and trauma and the response to trauma, especially in like people who are ex-military being treated as like, oh, isn't this scary thing? Oh, we have to be scared of them. They're dangerous. I was like, no, man, like most of the time it's you're you're picking up using the only coping mechanisms that you have available, and like one of them is laughter, like making a joke about it, making it light. Avoidance, yeah, I mean we don't talk about that right now, and and then again using that laughter, and this is kind of how we as indigenous people are functioning daily, like a lot of us, and I wanted to honor that in the dialogue choices in the game. And I wanted people to, when I say play as somebody with PTSD, it's more like I'm giving you the kind of options somebody who's going to be working within this trauma response, coping mechanism, crutch system. Like, she doesn't think like somebody who doesn't have this kind of triggers. So if something comes up in the game, it's going to be a personal trigger to the player, like to the character. I want to honor that in the dialogue. But that's not saying I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going to be purposely triggering people or anything like that. One of the things for me that is really hard to talk about when I talk about my PTSD is like my triggers are a scent on the air, 3 notes from a jingle I half remember, somebody whistling the wrong way. You can't put up warnings for that in your life, but you also aren't even ready for it because most of the time they're so sudden. And this is going to come up in the game. And as I was writing it, I was like, this might get too heavy for people. Some people are going to be like, oh, whatever. I don't know why they're giving this like really angry response all of a sudden to somebody offering them a flower. Um, but like, I was like, this is getting heavy for me because I know what it is. And this might be heavy for other people. So what can I do to kind of make it not feel too real or not feel too present? And I was like, let's lean into, that cheesy director's not cut of Blade Runner with Harrison Ford sounding like someone's holding a gun to his head. That really dry, oh, it was a dark, stormy night. And just by doing that light twist on the way people say things, I can honor that this character has these reactions while also not placing the player in a position where it's like, well, now I got to deal with this myself. Because there's that hyper reality of being kind of pulled back just because you're like, well, that's a really cheesy thing to say. So, like, I don't feel like this is too serious. So that's what I'm hoping at least I can do in this.
Yeah, I just want to say, Harrison Ford, I take back all of your Academy Awards and all of your Academy Award nominations for your completely garbage voice act. I'm just kidding. I listened.
It really sounded like somebody was threatening him.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my god. Yeah. Well, I take back whoever. It's like, I was like, wow. Actually, I can almost hear Harrison like apparently he's very solo like apparently outside yeah and if he doesn't really like apparently like what's his name, Mark Hamill was often like come on, we're making this great movie. It's like, just say your lines and I'll get out of here, kid. And it sounds like, what is this ridiculous voiceover? I'm gonna do it as badly as possible because I don't like this. Is ridiculous. And I had not actually heard it, and I had not seen Blade Runner with the actual full narration. I had heard like one line here and there, and I thought it was a joke. And then I went back and watched with the narration, and oh my god, it completely changes. It makes the whole movie almost like a comedy. When I was watching it, I couldn't get through it because I was like, oh my goodness, it is really that bad. But anyways, but I mean, it does make it incredibly cheesy, which does lighten it because Blade Runner is, it's a pretty somber tone, and also Rip Vangelis inspiring most of my musical. A lot of my Neophyte soundtrack because it was the music for Blade Runner. Speaking of cyberpunk, but anyways, To get back on track, yeah, it's yeah, I mean, like that totally makes sense of how you would I mean, that'd be really rough to make the game if the game itself is like constantly setting you into just making the game, right? Setting you into putting you into bad places. I mean, for me, I know I have enough physical challenges. I'm writing the rest of Neophyte 2 lying down because of my health issues. Basically, I cannot work in extended periods of time with my arms extended typing at a keyboard, and so I have to literally write it on a phone lying down. And so that's a whole nother set. That's a whole nother set of challenges. But anyways, I think that yeah, I think like that's really important that people. That's another thing that's hard to convey. It's hard to convey. It's like indigenous people or people who have like suffered the experiences like things that we are experiencing. For people who are audiences outside of that experience, like they'll connect with things and they'll get a lot of jokes, but like there's things that kind of I don't want to say they can't be gotten. I mean, ideally more people can understand these experiences so they can empathize a little more across the settler and the colonized gap, right? But there are some there are some things that are hard to kind of communicate across the gap. I mean, just on Neophyte 2 specifically, it was like one thing actually I was thinking about this was I was watching Severed, which is all about like again having everything. It's very Matrix like. You don't even know that you're inside of an oppressive, massive monstrosity that's using your body as a battery. It's kind of like it's very speaking of cyberpunk and science fiction games and movies. And thinking about Neophyte 2, one like the characters are some of the characters are kind of in that the Matrix. They're kind of like inside of disinform. And it's not to say that like being outside. I mean, if you think of the Matrix, one way to think about it as a metaphor for inside the cities of the empire, right, or in the colonizer cities like Chicago. Like Thomas Anderson is literally the Wachowskis are from Chicago, and I believe it's kind of modeled after certain office buildings there, but it's actually shot in Australia with Hugo Weaving. It was Australia, New Zealand, and I think it was Australia, but it's the characters are and in Severance very similar. Like you brought up Terry Gilliam's Brazil in the article, Meagan, also, which is like people are kind of trapped inside of the empire, like running the Excel spreadsheets and pulling the levers on the Death Star, ordering the drones from their PS4 controllers, but living in still kind of oppressed in a different way, but living in relative comfort. Maybe they have AC. They might be a nice water cooler. Maybe they have a Taco Tuesday. They can go and have a yoga class maybe. But there's a different thing where they're kind of like completely disinformed and they don't. You say the word colonialism. They're like, you mean the colonial marines and alien? What's a colonialism? What? Imperialism? A what? What's an imperial? Like I think the word imperialism is thrown around a lot. I think most Westerners, to be honest, they have no fucking idea what that means. Just to be completely honest, right? If people talk about anti-imperialism, it's becoming a bigger thing now because the empire's all fucking falling apart. But I still think like that word, it just gets said a lot nowadays, and people don't know what it means. I mean, more people are starting to want to discover it as they're falling through the cracks in Vancouver, Toronto, Los Angeles, and Honolulu. But it's still there's a lot. My point is there's a lot of disinformation inside, with a little more relative comfort. I mean, well, a lot more compared to somebody starving in Africa or in South Central America or in Asia. But the people outside, right? And I was thinking about this. It's kind of like I love Severed and I love The Matrix and I love Brazil and I love those, even Game of Thrones, because there's all these twists and turns. Because in colonizers' world, in the feudal, capitalist, neo-feudal, Britain, U.S. circa today, in an office space, there's a lot of lying. There's a lot of falsity. There's a lot of incorrect information, right? And so plot twists in a show, right, or a movie are about you thought this, but you've been lied to, Neo. Everything you thought, those are electrical signals being interpreted by your brain. Those are not the truth. Those are what the machines, right, as a metaphor for the entire capitalist structure or colonizer structure, are injecting into your brain as you sit in your office tower, filling out TPS reports. And that's what makes the plot twist that keep people interested, right, in modern Netflix, Hollywood movies, original series, TV shows, are for the disinformed inside of empire. Outside of empire, right? Like if you're in Vietnam, you can't really do a plot twist because people aren't constantly and ubiquitously lying. The government, corporations, your own teachers, your professors, your universities, right? Your history. The people doing land acknowledgements are not lying when they say, we now honor the ethnic Muslim minority here in Vietnam, because they actually do. As opposed to a lot of bullshit artists, who operate at NGOs in the United States and Canada, and then they say, oh yes, we care so much. Oh, actually, we're going to go to Africa and take all your shit with this Canadian mining company or this American military. We're going to go save people in, I don't know, anywhere in the world with this, paramilitary. So this is a weird paradox I've encountered. It's like, you can't do a plot twisty, matrixy thing in like an actual, I find it difficult in the indigenous city I shouldn't say that, but the ubiquity of disinformation that makes dystopian and cyberpunk science fiction interesting and twisty. The narrative turns are based on a society built on mass disinformation. What you discover, right, in Severed is they don't even know what they're working on, and then slowly you figure out, oh, maybe I'm actually killing people with my spreadsheets, like I don't know, like jacking the price of rice up in North Africa or in Bolivia, or maybe I'm cooling a country with my code, but I don't even realize it because it's broken up into 100 different people's subcode is put together to one large entity that's going to actually pilot the drones that blow up people in Iraq and Afghanistan, 90% innocent. And you find that out in episode 6, season 2. That's the entire twist. But anyway, that's a difficulty I've discovered, and that's a weirdness that I've discovered. But it is something that I think it actually just, it kind of reflects part of the fuck. And it's not impossible. This is a long ass rant, but I don't think it's not impossible to do like storytelling. But that's part of the struggle for me when I was writing basically the Planetary Indigenous Federation of Communists. It's a galactic Silk Road, basically. It's like bullshit artists, mass disinformation and mass violence based cultures that they're not perfect, but they're not constantly lying to each other. And so like storytelling for those peoples has been like a bit of it's a different kind of story. It's not that you can't tell a story, but it's not the Matrix. It's not really Brazil. You can't really do that because people aren't diseducated Thomas A. Andersons. And anyway, I'm just kind of like spitballing. I'm sorry. Somebody else pick it up.
No, I mean, like that, you basically summed up the fantasy that is the Matrix, that there is an empirical truth that you can be removed from the system immediately and see everything for what it was. I was like, that's not possible, because removal from the system, there's no other human system here, right? Like, it's all been infected by colonialism and imperialism. Like, there's not a place on this planet that would have you that has not been infected, and you can't leave it. Going to another country, you're not going to get away from it. And so if you can't get away from it, but you do see that there's a distruth here, that there's no information, lack of information, false information, you see it, but like you still have to function within that system. And I think that's the kind of unfair fantasy that sci-fi like Brazil, even like Brave New World and The Matrix is like, oh, all you need is this one person and they'll get you out and you'll see what it really is. And then because you're on the outside and it's not affecting you anymore. And so I think that's amazing that you want to tackle that, because I think that's something we do need now. We need in our sci-fi. We need to say, you can't just take the pill and then you're out. Like, you're still here. You just might be able to see it. I guess maybe They Live is a little bit closer to, like, you can put the glasses on and you can see it, but you still gotta go work at Starbucks because all the mom and pops in your neighborhood are gone because Walmart moved in. And we don't teach the skills. I think I'm starting to see it now. I'm really proud of this next generation coming up, and the fact that we have more and more youth who are comfortable with striking, that are comfortable with collective action, that are comfortable with community building, that are realizing that you can't just say, oh, We solved it. It's all over now. We're post, and we can live in this. Oh, it's messy. Like that's the thing too. I guess we misunderstand is like, oh, because Neo goes to a group that aren't as comfortable as him. That's what we should expect. And I was like, no, you. If anything, if we're doing the right things and we're building the right systems, we should be more comfortable. We shouldn't be moving from a place of less comfort, or sorry, of more comfort to less comfort. Like as you build up your community, if you need something, that means somebody's there for you. As you collectively action, your job place should become less stressful. It should become more beneficial. As shut down systems of capitalism and reject capitalist modes of commerce, you'll find that there's an amazing wealth of just things that were there that want textiles that of quality we've never seen before, because somebody and their family can spend a season working in comfort at home making beautiful linen. Like if anything, because we are working towards these things, our lives should become more comfortable.
So what you're both also talking about right now reminded me of a movie that I think is like uh, kind of on like a similar level of like maybe not sci-fi as like The Matrix or Brazil, but kind of also interrogates very similar things. So there's a movie called Bacurau, which is actually a Brazilian movie that came out I think in 2020. And it's a hard movie to like pitch to people just because it's very abstract and there's kind of a plot development that happens that you're meant to not really know about until you're actually watching the movie. So like mentioning it kind of spoils the movie, but essentially like it takes place in like this town in northern Brazil where there's like a mix of different people living together, like working class people of like kind of like multiracial backgrounds who are black and who live in that town and then who um, have to deal with outsiders coming in to essentially like delete their town from existence. And that movie is like not like when you if you do watch it, like you won't think that it's science fiction because it doesn't have like it doesn't have something like the Matrix where they're actually like entering like a digital interface, or it's not like other sci-fi stuff where like there's something maybe very technologically advanced, or there's something that is like a very abstract concept of like maybe another world existing, things like that. But the movie sells itself as a science fiction because it imagines like a different type of society existing. Because the town that it depicts existing in northern Brazil is like a place where multiracial people like coexist peacefully, and also there's like transgender people in the town who are able to kind of like express themselves freely, and who also are and people who are also in like unusual types of relationships where like they have like multiple partners, or they express themselves in different ways that in like in society it would be something that would be like punished or looked down on. um and if you do have a chance, I would recommend like watching it just because it's really interesting, and it actually like inspired me a little bit of like how to build a narrative of like people coexisting and then kind of like rising up together to like have some kind of armed struggle against people who are like threatening to overthrow their community and kind of to threaten that like peace that they've been able to build together. And in that sense, like that's also something that I think about a lot when I'm writing my own stories of like how can kind of like different maybe sci-fi or cyberpunk themes be expressed without the need to like necessarily express it through like the usual conventions or the usual means, because I usually work with a different mix of stuff. Like I like to draw like giant mechs, but there's also like other stuff like just imagining different types of societies and imagining different realities and interpreting those as like a type of science fiction.
Yeah, isn't it kind of funny as we're talking? Like, really, what we're talking about is using sci-fi to show, hey, here's what a mundane, regular, mostly, day would be like for indigenous people without colonialism.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to it like informally as kind of like maybe like rural cyberpunk, where it kind of focuses on not so much like the city being the center of everything, but how like more rural communities can live without having to like face the oppression of a city and living in a city that doesn't welcome them, and living like a lot of stuff that I write tends to focus on the rural side of that, and thinking about how the sci-fi or cyberpunk or all those other kind of like futuristic genres and aesthetics express themselves like outside of a city, but also like the city can also be like an interesting setting to explore as well, because I feel that like um, it's always something that is like evolving very fast. Like I've been freelancing on another project that like thinks about this kind of stuff, where what will a city in the future look like that is friendly for people to live in and to coexist in a sustainable way.
Yeah, actually, my reasoning for building up Hill's neighborhood, the main neighborhood in the game, the way I did was, I don't know if you've seen, I think it's Be Kind Rewind. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, where the central conceit of it is that because of capitalism, essentially this man and his adopted son are going to lose their home and their business because the city doesn't care and developers really want the land. And I remember watching that and be like, I would love to watch a movie right now that imagines how this film would go if the money was already there to be fixed. Like what else? Like this is still a really cool story and could still happen without that, really traumatic pressure to rescue your childhood home. And I was like, what would that look like? And that actually is part of why I was like, what would Hill would live in a neighborhood like this. So what would this neighborhood look like if people were constantly pumping money and care and maintenance back into it? And then you're like, oh, it would look like this. It would look great. I mean, it would still be a tiny old neighborhood. There'd be things that aren't perfect. Nobody fixes everything. I know a ton of people, myself, still use duct tape. Be like, oh, it'll be fine. It doesn't need to be screwed in yet. We'll come back to that when it's fallen down. And generally, like people who care about each other and have the resources will want to live in the same place forever, and they'll want to take care of it. And I was like, I want to live there, so I'm gonna build that in this game.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the duct tape too, because in a lot of the art that I do for cyber art, like even of like the interior of the mechs or like technology that kind of looks maybe very abstract or advanced, there's like always like a little bit of duct tape like holding one or two cables together, because it's like, oh, it's split open, but like we might not have the resources yet to like replace it, or replacing it is complicated, so just like put some duct tape on it and we'll like think about it later.
Just feels so much more human. Like
Yeah.
that's what we do. We don't fix everything 100%, 100% of the time. We're like, it's good enough.
Yeah, just on that the thing about fixing things with duct tape. Speaking of because I should, the indigenous game that we're working on is our indigenous Asian and Pacific Islander game, which is centered in Vietnam. A successful, as Santo brought up, armed struggle that removed colonizers, and guess what? Now they have functioning houses and apartment buildings that, the thing is, actually, I think it was some South Koreans or some British people who were complaining when they had basically zero COVID for a year and a half in Vietnam, and they beat all of the West hands down, and still beat the West hands down at pandemic, housing. They have literally 1,000 times less homelessness than California has 38 per million. Canada is up there, 3,800 per million, and Hanoi has 4. So basically almost virtually nobody's homeless. They have $4 insulin. In the U.S., it's like $500 a month if you want to not die from diabetes, basically. And so they have that kind of civilization. That's a lot of Neophyte too. Is I project a lot of what I know from my Luna Oi, who I worked on Decolonizers with, about their struggle to get the capitalists out and the colonizers out. I mean, as much as possible, and under their reality of continued siege, but they remove them from power anyway with PT-76 Soviet tanks specifically and AK-47s specifically, which Luna Oi knows how to operate, and so EJ better watch his ass. And also that it was actually a lot of the women were on the front lines, which is also similar to in Hawaii. Actually, when Hawaii was united to become the sovereign country by Kamehameha, it's actually women were on the front lines shooting, like in Wonder Woman, or like actually in history of the 2 lesbian women who founded Vietnam, beating back invaders, and they actually founded the country thousands of years ago. Or in Africa, there were the Kendake who fought the Roman lieges out and almost kicked the British out of the area that's in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Libya at one point. And anyways, so and then in the face of that resistance, now to this day, they still have kind of like other capitalist, well-to-do travelers to the Vietnamese cities complain that the toilet sometimes has some cracks. There's a little bit of tape on the hotel that the South Korean wealthy person stayed at. This COVID isolation is terrible because look at this apartment. There's a little bit of yellow on the ceiling. Oh my goodness, this is a horrible condition you make me stay in. Right? You're doing a lot worse than them. How's the U.S. doing for COVID? How are you doing for homelessness? How are you doing for healthcare? How are you doing for your basic material needs of your community that aren't being cared for, that the Vietnamese are dealing with, right? While the thing doesn't look brand new, right? It doesn't look like the Hyatt in New York City, which I mean, actually, I don't know how that looks. The subway looks like garbage. I can tell you that. The trains are a lot faster in East Asia. I tell you, the new infrastructure is looking a lot better, but it's like, it doesn't look brand new. And the place, but the people's needs are being taken care of. Like there's, again, you have apartment buildings in the country and in the rural area. I remember people got really pissed off because Luna said, I have a 500 square meter rice farm. It's like, oh, you're a landlord. It's like, well, we have a collectivized, cooperative system where everybody works on. Nobody owns and profits from people's labor, but nobody can believe that's possible in the Western world. I mean, even indigenous people and even other people of color like myself, I couldn't believe a lot of this stuff because I hadn't experienced and I haven't really investigated like people that had succeeded. Even in Cuba, it's right across the pond, but a lot of people still think that's some kind of authoritarian hellscape shithole. It must be worse than America. It's got to be worse than America because it's a third world something. I don't know. It's got a lot of tankies and something. Maybe the thing is sometimes the tanks remove people who are trying to based on ethnic origin exterminate people, like in Vietnam, and they use tanks, like sometimes Russian tanks. I mean, unfortunately for people who have blue and yellow flags. But anyways, it's like there are places like that like still survive, that have like and like they don't want to fight wars. They're not like looking forward to like the peoples in Vietnam. They're not like, oh, when can we fight the next war? They don't like play Call of Duty all the time and then like salivating to go fight a war because why? Because they know what that's like. They know what they had to do to survive. They're like prepared if they have to right now. The U.S. is trying to start wars using Hawaii as a headquarters to shoot missiles and aircraft carriers and F-35s, poisoning my water supply as we speak into Vietnam. I mean, I'm not joking about that. They're using Taiwan, Vietnam, Philippines, everything they can to make a war in the South China region. But that doesn't mean that they're like begging for it. There's a difference. I think that's like this is something I've thought about as well, which is like what would an actual, if there is a conflict that happens, because there wasn't zero conflict across the history of indigenous peoples, right? It's not like there was a lot more peace, certainly, in a lot of Asia, the Pacific, Turtle Island, Africa, for many more centuries than that plagued for 2,000 years the Europe, the part of the west of Asia, basically, that we know as Europe, that was plagued with just almost unthinkable levels of violence and suffering. But there were some battles, and when they happened, right? Like for example, in Hawaii in the 1700s, for example, Vietnam 2,000 years ago, Vietnam 1970s, etc. The level of post-traumatic, not just post-traumatic stress, but what's called the moral injury. The reason why the U.S. military and colonizer militaries, a big reason why they have a 4 times higher suicide rate, right? Is not just because the violence itself absolutely terrible and war is hell, but if you go to a place, you believe you're fighting for freedom, justice, and defending your people, and you realize after you kill a bunch of Iraqis or Vietnamese people, you do these horrible things. You did it for nothing. In fact, you did it for less than nothing. You committed genocide, and you and your friends died for nothing. That is the worst part, and that's a thing, And like I've talked to Luna, a lot of the Vietnamese. There's a lot of Vietnamese community actually where I live in the Chinatown of Honolulu, Hawaii. That's a lot of my Asian heritage. It's Chinese, Vietnamese, and Japanese people, and the people will say, you can rightly celebrate your dad or your grandpa, like Luna's grandpa. He fought so that we can be free from begging for scraps and being treated like little quote unquote yellow monkeys, like the French did, like the Americans did. So you can look; those statues don't have to be torn down, in the middle of a global, oh my God, you mean that we had some horrible, presidents? They don't have that moment because they don't have to. When they have fought, not to say every fight and everything was justified. There were mistakes, but like overall, they were fighting as indigenous people of Vietnam to defend against actual exterminatory global capitalist and imperialist genocide and plunder, And so that's why, I don't know. It's like, so it's something that is like, it's not a thing that like can be, and they won. That's the other thing, with like 1,000 times less money, 100 times like less total crafts and technology. They won the struggle, and they also deal with the ongoing impacts of the entire place was bombed to the Stone Age and the Agent Orange and the birth, all of that. It's stuff that Americans can't even really dream of. But what they don't have is the moral injury. They don't have the we fought and died and I killed for a billionaire to make more money, and I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing good, and I sacrificed everything, and nobody actually come back and nobody gives a shit. That kind of, because I think we've talked a little bit about the dealing with the trauma of war, but there's a difference to being the stormtrooper rather than being, not to say the Ewok, because George Lucas based those on the Miwok indigenous people of California, and not all the redwood forests are all burnt to a crisp because of climate change caused by colonial capitalism. But there is a difference to being those people who defended against your, annihilation rather than the people that are invading. And so, and anyway, what was the point of all this? And so that's something that like Neophyte 2 also explores, which is like, what if you're in a country and there is a colonizer who understands that they could be annihilated, but they're constantly backing far right inside of your country. You don't want to fight a war. I don't want to fight the indigenous Asian and Pacific Islanders like myself. We don't want to fight a war. I don't want to see my relatives get killed again, like in Korea and Vietnam and Okinawa, my indigenous relatives. I got a lot of indigenous Uchiranchu, that's the Okinawan relatives. I don't want to watch them all die when the U.S. tries to start war in the Taiwan Strait, But like, they make it incredibly difficult by funding far right, disinforming people, putting aircraft carriers all over our land, bombing my mountain to practice bombing Afghanistan or Taiwan, and so it's kind of like that's also part of the reality, which is that we don't want to fight, but the struggle is really like there's people who want to kill and fight even when you don't have to, like the United States. They have enough money and wealth to feed everyone if they took 10% of the military's budget. But I really want to kill everyone for a handful of people. And there's other people who will do everything possible not to fight, and they want to make peace, and they don't want war. But there's another side that says, no, there will be no peace. We're going to bomb this Silk Road. Your indigenous planet will be bombed away. And before we will reign over your ashes before we become an equal in an indigenous prosperous planet. We will reign over this ashes, and that's like the problem that's like central to a lot of stuff of Neophyte 2. So what do you do with that? It's like a very difficult problem, and And I've been talking for a long time, so yeah. But that's another question that I think like I don't know if that speaks to Santo's game, but I feel like there might be a little bit of that in Cyber R.
Yeah, no. Thank you for like going over all those points because yeah, I think it relates quite a bit because part of my inspiration for cyber art is like how I've educated myself more on like anti-imperialist history of like different places around the world. So not just South America, but also trying to learn more about, how different nations and different countries have worked towards their own liberation or have fought towards their own liberation. And I actually own a book that I got. I think got it last year. There's a bookstore in Toronto called A Different Book List, and they worked together with a local Vietnamese publisher in Toronto to publish a collection of essays by Ho Chi Minh about like what he synthesized in understanding like the struggle of Black people around the world and the different essays that he wrote about things like slavery and things like imperialism and colonialism and how that affects Black people around the world and how that also served him a lot as like inspiration for what he wanted to see happen in Vietnam. Um, and in reading that, also kind of like it just gave me like more inspiration of like where do I go next in learning more about this. And one of the things that inspire cyber art are also like each story, because it's divided into three stories essentially. Each story is inspired kind of like by a different historical event or something that is kind of it's grounded in reality in the sense that like it's something that happened in real life and that I'm kind of like drawing from to make a story that kind of like talks about that condition in some way. So, like in the first story, you have like these two pilots who want to retrieve stolen mech, and that's generally like applies to the to like a movement to recover stolen land back, but it also is specific to the Guarani people in the northern, towards the northern part of Paraguay, so the Paitautera. They traditionally lived on a mountain called Cerro Guasu, which is just big mountain. And they have been like pushed off of that mountain in the ongoing like decades of colonialism, and that mountain I actually featured in my game as like the destination that the players always pointed to. So like wherever you are on the map or the level, like you'll always see that mountain on the horizon because that's kind of like your goal to get to and reclaim. And that mountain has been in real life, that mountain has been like a very like historically and culturally important location for the indigenous people there, and which has been like under a lot of um, through a lot of colonialism and gradually being stolen by like the military and like the local government. So it's something that's where I draw that from to show that narrative. And then the second route is inspired a lot by um, like the how colonialism, imperialism like displaces people and how it disconnects people from their own culture so that like they are disconnected and they struggle a lot with finding themselves in the world. So like the second route is about a character who um, isn't sure about like who they are, not so much that they don't know who they are, but they just are trying to find the answer of like where do they belong exactly in this world. And part of that is the reason why the second route is a lot about like you talking, like the player talking to other characters and getting to know them, understanding like their stories, and kind of like coming to a conclusion at the end of like what do you want to do next. And then the third route is kind of my personal favorite of like where I got the inspiration from, but the third route that follows like a war veteran called Barrett. She's actually inspired by a real life woman called Soledad Barret, who was a militant communist in Paraguay who trained in Cuba and then went around in South America, specifically like Paraguay and Brazil, fighting against like the different dictatorships that took over the region and engaged in like military combat with them. And she was eventually like captured and executed by the Brazilian government. But she actually had a daughter who still lives in Brazil to this day, and who still kind of like teaches that story and also teaches other things around like history and things to do with the dictatorship and stuff like that. And sort of that story is not like her story is like very unique, but it's definitely also like not the only story of like militant women who fight for liberation of their country or for their nation or for their people. That's also like definitely like a story if you read about like the Cuban Revolution or different revolutions around the world, like women are like usually at the forefront of that, like in Vietnam as well, where like they also have a huge stake in that revolution because that will also bring a lot more like gender equality and uh, um, gender based like justice through that, and that's like the importance of like women taking part in that, and also me showing a route where like there's like a woman who is armed and she is like has very determined goals and um, kind of like knows her enemy very well. And also because like I wanted to make a route with a character who was like a grandma or like a soon to be grandma or like someone older, because I find that a lot of times like when we think of like action games, we may not think of like older people or people who um, are maybe like retired in a sense. So that's also something else that I'm also like exploring of like the importance of like elders and grandmas and older people who like have experienced a lot of like imperialism, colonialism, all these other oppressions, and how valuable like their experience is in like trying to not resolve that, but trying to like tackle it in a way that um, will like empower their community or will guide their community to like a better place. But yeah, I would say overall like CyberR is like kind of a culmination of like me just getting really deep into history and learning a lot more about history, and I've kind of gotten to like a happy place where like I know where I'm going narratively, but I'm still like continuously like reading and learning more. Like the next book I want to read is I want to start reading some Franz Fanon, because I know that just from reading brief passages from him, I know that he says some really interesting things about like colonialism and settler colonialism and like what a settler is and like what a colonized person is, and like relating that relationship. And there's also I have a bunch of like history books from Paraguay telling more about like different communist figures that were really like important in our history of like developing our culture and developing different like movements against like the dictatorships that were um, were really strong in like Paraguay and other countries at that time, and how they worked to like go against it and try to topple it and try to like basically like fight against fascism, especially in a time when that was like everything in the environment was like extreme fascism. So yeah, I think like I'm also like doing my best to like maybe not overload myself with all of that and not trying to like pressure myself to include like everything that I've learned into the game, because I'm also trying to work separately with the narrative of like these are characters, this is their dialogue, and this is the natural way that it's going to happen in, but still like keeping those themes in mind, but um, trying to not like overload myself by trying to like cover every single topic possible, and just like having a reasonable scope of like what I actually want to touch on.
Yeah, I mean that's I'm sorry. I've taken 5 years. I'm sorry to everybody who has been following me. And I said Neo Future 2 is going to come out in 2020. And it's been 5 years. But in my defense, I've been having to promote Neo Future 1 and market and do all this other. Pro tip for game devs: majority of the work happens like after you release the game. I'm a Silver Spook Games is basically I'm like the creator and publisher and market everything. So, but if you have a publisher, it's different. But if you have other people working on it, but for me, it's been like full time everything. After the game is out, there's like as much or possibly more work after that. So, but also working on Neophy too. So, don't overload yourself is a good advice. And yeah.
Yeah, and like really, and I mean, totally fair what you mentioned about like a project taking longer. Like Cyber now has taken like usually I try to stay on the shorter end of like development cycles, but Cyber I technically started like kind of building it out of like maybe not programming it directly, but like a game design document and things like that, and figuring out the narrative and all those things. I probably started doing that yeah like late 2019, like early 2020, so it's been like maybe almost 2.5 years now of working on it, which is like already the longest time that I've spent like working on a game, and it's probably going to take a little bit longer, but also being kind to myself and remembering that like I don't have like all of the time in the world, and also that this is like a much more ambitious project that I've taken on compared to my previous games. Like this is something that involves 3 different characters and like 3 different styles of gameplay and like a bunch of dialogue. So it's gonna be worth it in the end, but it's definitely like gonna take its time, and I'm just gonna have to like make sure to like work around that.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, it sounds like I think Megan's game is going to be coming. Well, I can't say anything, but it says on the Steam page fall. It says fall. It's coming, planned release in fall. So, oh yeah, before I forget, everybody. I mean, if I know Megan's Hill Agency has a Steam wishlistable ability, so please wishlist Hill Agency if you haven't already. I've already got it on mine. You're fired from the Silver Spook in group if you don't. I'm just kidding. If you don't wishlist it,
No, don't say that.
no, I'm just kidding. But no, don't do it. I'm gonna do my Taika thing. I'm like, hey everybody, I'm just an influencer. Click the goddamn like button. Click it. Click the wishlist button. No, no. I'm super looking forward to it. And also, if Santo, if your game, it's not on doesn't have a Steam page yet, right?
Not yet. We are planning to. Like I did, I do have a Steam page like in the works for it. We're still just waiting for the demo to get to a more stable place to be able to like release a demo. So we do want to release a demo through like itch.io and Steam, and then start promoting it a little bit more across all our channels. But I can't say for sure when that's going to happen, but we are hoping to have it happen like in the next month or two.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, they would definitely be keeping an eye out for that. Yeah, just I want to make sure I got that in there because this is partially Hispanic, but also like I do want everybody to this is part of when you're in the indigenous devs. If you're in the indigenous devs community, there's a whole indigenous game devs community. I can tell you this, like the indigenous game dev community is not like the colonizer game dev community. I hesitate with it's almost an oxymoron to say the colonizer game dev community. It's more like the crypto bro rip each other off community. I'm sure they're all crying into their Jordan Peterson mugs about all the money they lost in the stock and the stonks and the Bitcoin crash in a lot of that community. But the indigenous game devs community, if you are an indigenous developer out there, if you are interested in indigenous game dev, there are some communities that we encourage you to join because a lot of it is about it's mutual aid and supporting each other and trying to get these games out because it is. I think that's another thing that was in the article, if I'm not mistaken. That is a good point, which is that finding your community that can help be supportive of you while you're working on these project games. There can be like a Herculean sometimes Sisyphean, ideally Herculean, but sometimes Sisyphean, you just feel like you're grinding it forever, never completing it. But it's difficult projects, is my point. And so like it does help to have some community and like a camaraderie and stuff like that. So so anyways, but that's kind of why I want to also make sure that like everybody follows at Achimos Tawanan Games and Santos as well on Instagram and also on Twitter. In case for some reason, sometimes I've been forgetting to get all this done by the end, so I wanted to get it in there early. But also, I mean, we're not like done, but I just wanted to make sure I stuck that in there somewhere. And yeah, Hill Agency's game is was it? There's something else I wanted to like briefly say. I feel like I'm talking too much, but I feel like there was something I wanted to say, which is that like, oh yeah, that's right. Like in another thing I'm always thinking about is how like indigenous technology. And Santo, you kind of alluded to this. I think you both alluded to this, but kind of indigenous, peoples have always had kind of this technology, the wayfinding that the Pacific peoples like myself, the Kanaka Moana, Kanaka Maoli, etc., had like these technologies of wayfinding and of ecological technology that was able to maintain, even with farming, able to maintain the water, the soil, the plants and animals and the ecosystems for millennia, while also feeding everybody while working 2 or 3 hours a day. Which was similar for a lot of the Turtle Island indigenous that's kind of a biotechnology or a ecological technology to feed yourself while also maintaining the land. But also there's been indigenous technologies, and it's something that I'm working on also in any of it too, is like in that city in the picture, there's like the indigenous people advance far. They're not Asian and they're not Pacific Islanders, but they are like inspired by them and by us, I should say. But they have warp gates, they have FTL, they can like, they're basically like a Type 4 Kardashev civilization. They can like harness the entire power of suns. One other thing I was thinking of was like, because China actually made an artificial sun that lasted for 120 million degrees, 20 minutes plus. It like dwarfs anything that the colonizer Western world has been able to even approach. The quantum supercomputers calculate in a millisecond what it takes 30 trillion years for the fastest Western computer to compute. So they've already, indigenous society, my point is indigenous peoples historically actually, as Hawaii had electric lights before the White House and invented submarines before Jules Verne published 20,000 Leagues. Today there are super advanced, non-imperialist, what we would call socialist indigenous civilizations, in the sense that they're not colonizer civilizations, and they are far in advance. And so in EFA 2, indigenous people have warp gates, FTL. They can like make Dyson spheres if they want to. They can like make black holes, and they use black holes as like Christmas tree lights, as decorations. They can like make them hover in the middle of the living room, and like like we have like an image of the Sagittarius A star supermassive black hole that looks like a little orange and red donut, right? But the indigenous people are so advanced they can make a supermassive black hole appear in front of your face for fun, without sucking you into it, and then make it disappear. And so their technology to Western colonial capitalist like Elon descendants is to the Westerner space people. Indigenous technology is absolutely indistinguishable from magic, and they're trying to steal it from them. And so part of it's been like the fun part is just kind of like getting all these technology, but they have like indigenous names, and the way they integrate the technology is there are almost no weapons. Like they actually basically don't have any weapons because they haven't needed any. There was actually a test I read in Korea. There was a aptitude test, like the merit test for the Mandarin of China was similar for Korea. For 1,000 years there was no war. The border never moved, right? And so there was an aptitude test for just general knowledge to become a administrator or to get ahead in Korea for millennia. And then there was a military test. The military test was to see if you were going to be a good soldier, a commander in Korea. It was so underutilized, they actually just forgot how to give the military exam. That's how peaceful it was for basically 1,000 years or centuries and centuries and centuries. It was one very large war, and then they forgot how to do military because they were too busy prospering and just peacefully, for the most part, not perfectly, but there was not huge wars, right? And so it's kind of like one of the concept was like to kind of move it back in the direction of where we started. In the colonial, I call it the mass. I call it in the game, the indigenous people call the Earthling descendants of the 2,000 richest, Euro capitalists, the descendants of the descendants of the unhealed Roman trauma, who came out of Europe, right? And we talked about this in previous panels. I know, and so undoing that takes sometimes, ideally, it takes as minimal violence, maximum education, and cooperation and economic incentives to heal from all of that as possible in the time becoming post-colonial, right, as a planet or as a federation of civilizations, right? But then after the period of the healing can come indefinite amounts of, the challenges are, you might still have pandemics, you might still have hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, you might still have crimes of passion, so you can have detective games forever, because people might have love triangles and it gets weird, and then no matter how prosperous you get. But what you don't have is like mass civilization on civilization, just incredible levels of brutality and violence. And so in that healed time, so similarly, the post-colonial reality would be similar to some of these, and there's a huge peace times as well in Turtle Island. But anyways, so that's something. So you could be using technology for all kinds of things. I was watching, like, in East Asia, they were like, people are worried about robot dogs. Oh my God, the police department of Hawaii bought an 84,000 robot dog. It's like, what are you spending $50 million for American police robot dogs to go chase down black people and Hispanic migrants at the border? And robots are dystopian. Cameras are dystopian. Technology is dystopian. Come back to that thing, right? But it's kind of like, but then I was looking at this video in East Asia, and it's just like, here's a robot dog. But the robot dog, people are just like riding on. It was at the Olympics, and there's like kids just riding on the robot dog. It's like a little fun little. It just brings joy to people's life. It sparks joy. Robot dogs spark joy for like mostly successful indigenous civilizations. Just like, we're just riding robot dogs for fun. They're not chasing people down based on their skin color or because they didn't pay rent on time. It's just like, you can have robot dogs that aren't Black Mirror shit, or Matrix shit, or Brazil or 1984 Orwellian shit. It's just like cool robot dogs that spark joy because they're not busy fighting and killing outside and inside, And anyway, so that's kind of, I don't know. We're kind of probably getting close to the 2-hour mark, so I'm kind of like trying to get it back towards post-colonial futures, and what do you kind of see for that? What is your ideal future? I know it's obviously Hill is the city sounds like a very positive place, but what is your kind of like ideal post-colonial reality?
Well, I mean, I would say Hills is sort of like what I'd like to have right now. But when it comes to kind of the like, oh, what do I, what's my Gene Roddenberry? So my big thing is I'm really into the way we used to farm is not what people conceive of as farming, because it was more like what was called by the British forest management. And it's still kind of practiced now, but not the way it's supposed to be. Where essentially you don't have to keep taking care of rows of plants with, fertilizers and machinery. You literally set up a forest. You tend it like a garden, and it just provides plenty because you're putting the, everyday little bit of labor in. So instead of, needing how many migrant workers or paying like almost nothing, if you're paying anything at all, working long backbreaking hours, you and 20 of your friends go have a party of it, go out, pick everything, come back, you're going to spend the day processing it. Like, we lost this. And what's crazy to me is if you study, if you know anything about Britain's sort of their own history, like their real history of the people, not, just the military and the ruling class, it's like they had those skills because well, when the Romans came, there was an indigenous population there, and they were practicing really similar methodologies for, getting food, and they were what we would call now managing their forests. And when the whole colonization project, of taking over North America happened, or the Americas, those people, by the time that came around, their way of life had been totally lost, because they're like, no, Roman efficiency, like, we can do it like this is better, even though the land does not work that way because we're not in Italy. Same thing here. It's like we lost that knowledge. Or I don't think it's right to say we lost it, because there are still those who keep that knowledge and still have it. It's just that, like language, we're not seeing it on the wide scale that we should be. But, you have a lot of indigenous land protectors who, they're not just like protesting against oil and pipelines. They're also protesting to get back the legal right to do the actions that are required to keep California from burning, because they refuse to do the controlled fires and the controlled burning, which is a traditional way of managing the land. They're not allowed to plant or cull. They're not allowed to make sure that the wolf, the wolves are protected and that they're not hunted to extinction, because they're the ones that keep the land stable, because of keeping the different populations of the larger grazing animals down. Like, we have this knowledge, we know it now, and it's like really infuriating, to hear that coming out of like academia, where they're like, oh, we just discovered this, and did you know? And it's like, oh, we did all these scientific experiments. You're like, yeah, we knew. We knew. You told us we weren't allowed to do it because we were dumb. So frustrating.
Post-colonial looks like no
Yeah.
academia. No.
Along those lines too, it's like I guess like my kind of maybe quote unquote ideal future, or maybe somewhere in the future that like, or a future that I would like to see is like returning to or becoming a more communal society, in the sense that like right now, for example, I don't know my neighbors. Like, we are, especially living in the city and living in like the suburbs or neighborhoods, like by design we're so isolated from each other that like I know like what my neighbor is called, but I don't know I don't have like his contact information, or I don't know like does he like need anything from me, or like can I help him, or and living in that more communal sense where we can understand each other better and like actually live together. And one of those reasons is also that like uh, because I always talk about this with my partner, because we talk about, for example, like adoption, but how adoption like is essentially a very traumatic structure that came into existence primarily to separate children from their families, especially indigenous children from their families, and how like adoption should be happening within a community of people that you know that can help you in raising your child. And that's something that like my grandmother like would do, in the sense that like she had raised like several children who belonged to other people in her community, and she was very like um, very much like of the sense that like I will help you with your child if you need help. And something funny that came from that is that when she visited us in Canada once, it's like a very common cultural thing for her to like, if a child comes up to her because they're curious or something, like she'll like pat them on the head, or kind of like suddenly like she is like looking after the child, just because it's something that comes very natural to her. She's just looking after the children, but that's something like kind of unusual to see in like a Canadian city or a suburb where like you don't know your neighbors, you don't know their families or their children, and um you know that kind of connection. There's no connection in that at that level. So for me, like a more, I guess, ideal place would be to have that kind of sense of community that you can trust others with your children. You can trust others to help you, with living your life as like, whether it means, taking care of things while you're away, or trusting in each other so that you don't need to have, fences dividing your homes, or you don't need to have like these physical barriers that kind of like isolate us, and we now kind of live in our own you know piece of land where we don't know anyone else around us. And that's something that, like, in like rural indigenous communities in Paraguay, for example, you know everyone. You know who everyone is. You know everyone's name. You know who their children are. You know who your relatives are. So that kind of like connection at a communal level with other people who might not be related to you, to really like establish more solidarity and more camaraderie with each other.
Yeah, like that's the big thing, especially now with the housing crisis in Canada, is like you've been encouraged since like basically I would say post World War II to get as far away from your family, get as far away from your childhood home as possible. And like now with like houses in my parents' neighborhood being what 300% more expensive than they were
Mhm.
when they bought them. Um, and actually and no sort of cultural consciousness about that. Like when I mentioned like I would love to move into my childhood neighborhood, people are like, but why? And I was like, well, like I grew up here. Like I don't know a lot of people, but I at least know people here. And like we have been conditioned to think staying with your family is not just like it's almost like childish. Like you're considered a child if you still live with your parents, even though financially most people our age, how are they supposed to live? It's sometimes it's I live with my parents or I don't have a place at all. But and they're seen as being childish and it's something like it's looked down upon. And I was like, I really would like to see that be a big change also, and that in my futures is you know praising somebody. You're like, oh, you still live at home? That's great. I mean, do you want to live there? There is also that aspect, though, of like we are coming into a consciousness about how toxic our relationships have been growing up and how toxic our parents' relationships with their own parents. And this, like, we're really starting to talk about generational trauma right now. But sometimes the way I see it couched is this language of like, we'll just get away and build your new community. And it's like, but if I don't even know how to build a community where I'm from, how am I supposed to build a new one? Like, if I don't know the difference between just getting away and I need to give myself some like respectable space, how am I supposed to replicate those systems? Like that idea of you take what you know with you to these places, and that's what scares me about the conversation. I would like to hear more going into both sides of like, yes, you need space, but you also need to think about what are you taking with you to this new space that was there in the original that you're trying to get away from. And sometimes you can't come back, but maybe we talk about how you do come back and if that is what that looks like.
Yeah, I just wanted to say like on that, like, because it resonates with a lot of stuff that like you said also, and I've been thinking about, which is you kind of said you can't escape the matrix, take a pill, and then things are better. It's kind of like you can't just like get up and move. I'm gonna leave the U.S. and go to Vietnam, because some people say, oh, I'm going to Vietnam. I see every day. I watch Luna and EJ's channel. 10 people are like, I'm going to Vietnam, and it's like that doesn't fix actually. Well, I mean that can help you a little bit economically, certainly, and you might have a little better healthcare. You get a few things will benefit you. You might not. You might, of course, if you're in incredible danger because you're, I don't know, trans woman of color, or just like a lot of people who are in danger for a variety of reasons. But also like it's like, yeah, like the 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 a lot of the work is not simply about getting away from that, yeah, intergenerational trauma, like you're saying. It's also um you know internally healing from a lot of that, and also oftentimes like it actually takes some work inside to change who you are. And it's not like one thing. It's not, I think, like it's not even just like you just go to therapy and then you get, not to say people shouldn't go get therapy, but it's like it's a whole, like some people talk about like Lifeway. I feel like that's, it is important to talk about like it's a holistic being a stormtrooper is not because I believe capitalism was good and now I believe capitalism is bad. I'm fixed. I put a communist flag in my bio. I'm good. It's like, no, you have ways about you. You could be a communist person, and I know lots of people who've just like gone off into somewhere in the middle of Maine or some state, started a little commune, and it falls apart a year and a half later after somebody replicates their own patriarchal structures, even like non-white, non-straight cis people, full anarcho-communist, something decolonial, Marxist, and then they show up, even indigenous people, and then they show up and they haven't like addressed like all of the bits of stormtrooperness, the empire that was in them, and then they replicate it in ways that they don't even see coming. And like, I'm gonna be a better parent than my parents, right? In the abusive. Well, but what does that actually look like? Do you know what it looks like? Have you seen it? Like, I read this book, and I'm gonna do. I mean, everybody reads a book. Not everybody. A lot of people. I know multiple sides of my family. They've read a book, and then they tried, and then they still did things that they regretted later. And so like it's kind of like there's a lot that has to be unlearned. That's why like here at the Silver Spook Hui, we're literally on the most decolonized, short of full decolonators, like a Cuba, like a Vietnam, or I don't know, somewhere that has some kind of functioning political unit with a socialist of some sort government. And the Big Island is the closest that we can get because we don't have like astronomical, ridiculous rents like on Oahu, like Toronto, Vancouver level of difficulty. That's why Silver Spook Games is here. And the Silver Spook Games is a cooperative game company. It's also a Silver Spook housing cooperative where we had people that we're not related to also living here in the community. Sometimes at different levels of education and self-healing. And because that's what we're trying to do. And also trying to raise but we have to accept, because I've watched so many people fail in their communes, in their housing, mutual aid organizations. I'm not to say don't do them, but I always go like, we're gonna make mistakes. I am half stormtrooper. I speak English. I speak a stormtrooper language: English, French, Spanish. The colony is in me. It's the Anglo-Saxon barbarian. It's all up in there. Too late already. So I can't be like, I'm gonna make a perfect, or me and my partner Holly, and we're gonna make this perfect. No. Like, we're gonna make a lot of mistakes, and you gotta like be ready to do that. Like, I know absolutely we've made mistakes, on multiple occasions, and people who join, they're gonna join with, like me, right, and like my partner, who was raised in a white conservative Christian community as a white so-called Canadian. We're gonna come with all kinds of all the colonial scars are coming with that, and so we have to like be very, very much prepared and like humble and go like, we're gonna screw up big time, and then we have to be able to admit. The problem is when you try to start something like that, and then you have people who at least if you have the ability to say there's a possibility I might be wrong, it's kind of like the people who say, no, you're just an SJW. I can't hear that trauma. Whatever you think you're saying, you're just a woke this and that. You have a choice to always like at least attempt to maybe hear that you are wrong and other people are experiencing things and you might not be doing things in the perfect way. And if you have that, you might have a lot of problems. I mean, it's something I'm trying to kind of philosophizing my own post-colonial, or the part of the process of entering post-colonial is like being able to at least recognize, right? Taika Waititi, he speaks English. Too late, It's not, I'm not saying that he's not indigenous, but at least he recognizes, I got all this weird stuff in me, like everybody, like me and everyone else. And it's like I feel like sometimes like some of his movies and my games are just like part of that process of like, drawing out all of this kind of like this black Roman tar, that's like 2,000 years old. And it's like slowly falling out, a bit at a time. But we can't be like, okay, now I'm all good. Now I'm going to write a book and teach you how to be fully post-colonial. Because then I would be going back to those old ways. So anyway, so I'm kind of like just theorizing, but I think that is a very important part, that you can't just like snap our fingers, read this, that, or even 100 books, and then we're there. It's like everything about who we are, our economics, the way that we relate to children, to partners. Holly has had to teach me a lot of stuff about how dudes are in indigenous or in colonial society, and it's like you got to learn that shit. And I can choose to be like, Well, no, it's blah 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 blah. But we just have to class. Or, I don't know, some bullshit. I'm an indigenous Hawaiian, so you can't tell me this because you're It's like, are you gonna hear it? Or are you gonna stormtrooper out and shout down people that are trying to educate you, that have experiences that you don't have access to? And so anyway, but I'll stop talking about myself. But I think that's very important, is being able to be open to education, even if we are affiliated with our tribe, to know some of our elders we all have made mistakes, and to be able to have those conversations about that and get educated.
Yeah, no, I think those are very important things to consider as well, because sometimes there's like, so this is another thing that I want to read to like kind of expand my knowledge as well. But in Brazil, there was a writer called Paulo Freire, who wrote a book called the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I think that might not be how you pronounce it, but the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that essentially explains like how oppressed peoples have to like educate themselves in order to liberate themselves. And the specific example that he used was Black people in Brazil, and uh, how they have to like learn about their true history and about how Brazil has, built that country up under oppression in order to like understand what their liberation would look like. And that actually, like, Franz Fanon, I believe, I think it was Franz Fanon came first, and I think Paulo Freire kind of like built off what Franz Fanon had written, and that's how he approached it. But essentially, like, something that he said that I have a hard time kind of finding the original quote, because I think it's been circulated a lot in the internet by now, that like the quote is like its own thing. But essentially the phrase of like, um, if an oppressed like individual doesn't understand the reason for their oppression, then they desire to become the oppressor. So like, when an oppressed individual, doesn't understand why it is that they live in like a reality where they're subject to violence, or subject to um, isolation. They're ostracized from the communities. They, suffer a lot of different things associated with like different systems of oppression. But if they cannot understand why those things happen or where they come from, then they're going to think, oh, well, I'm going to become the oppressor to gain that power, so that I can then escape my oppression. When that, it doesn't work that way, and then those same oppressed people will never kind of escape that cycle of oppression. And what thinkers like Paulo Freire and Franz Fanon propose forward is that that education is really important in how oppressed people understanding their own oppression and then finding a way forward. And that's also part of the reason why Paulo Freire was actually in charge of, I think, I don't know the exact year or the timeline, but at one point he was in charge of building, like, I think, Brazil's like educational curriculum, which is why, like, to this day, like, Brazil has like has a pretty robust education system that teaches people a lot of things in depth that aren't taught the same way in the States, for example. So, they do learn about a lot of things about race and colonialism that in the States is not taught the same way. Obviously, like, there's areas of Brazil where that might not be taught the same way, where there's like more racism, but it is something that is like, there was a movement for that, and that succeeded in some way to make sure that oppressed people have the education they need, so that they can understand the root of that oppression. But yeah, I was just kind of thinking of that as well, because there's also a journey that I had to go through myself, in that, like, from a very young age, I understood that, colonialism is bad, but I never like understood the way that it kept being like replicated in present day. So a lot of my like getting to know my family better and all those things was also kind of like understanding why it was that they, made the mistakes that they did, and why and how I can kind of like maybe not so much learn from their mistakes, but understand why they happened and see like, how can I live my life from now on in like the most truthful way to myself so that um, I can learn from their lives and then also understand like why it is that their lives came to those like crossing points. And it also like uh, just helps me also understand how like the world works in some way. Like it helps me kind of understand the contradictions that exist in societies. And for me personally, like I really like to understand all those different things because it just helps me, think of like what the future could look like.
Yeah, totally. That, yeah, 100%. I know that we're a little bit over time, and I see that Megan does have to go. So, Megan, if you wanna, yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
no problem. But yeah, if you wanna just kind of give your outro, whatever final things you want to say about Hill Agency or anything
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Santa's closing it really well. I think that's a much more articulate way of what I was trying to get across, where, yeah, you have to look at these and examine these relationships like structurally, um, generationally. It's not just you, it's not just your family. But for me, just there will be really exciting news coming next week, maybe. I you didn't hear it from me, but if you follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Achimo Games, or yeah, if you follow us on Steam, we'll be announcing some things really soon. So yes, that's really what I got to pouch right now.
Awesome,
Nice.
exciting.
On that note, I also have to head out. I just realized that it got very, very dark in here suddenly. But yeah, no, I also just want to say thank you again for including us on this panel. It was really nice to like catch up and talk about some more of this stuff and my own like stuff to promote. I'm still chipping away at Cyber Revolution. We're hoping to have a demo sometime either in June or July or towards the end of the summer, up on Steam and itch.io. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Tomatrioska, where I've been mostly just tweeting like very regularly because I'm trying to take a break from being on Twitter so much. But I do post some stuff from my Patreon there, which is where I post all the art that I've been working on. Any kind of like project updates, you can check out Brujeria at Work. We have a Twitter and we have a website as well. That's the more official feed where like we post more concrete dates and where you can find some of our content. But in the meantime, I'll be busy working away at getting some more art and working with our programmer Nico to get the build ready.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. I'm always, super excited. I've been following both of these games for possibly 2 years. So yeah, I'm very excited to play both of them. Possibly, we'll see. I think probably Hill HC might come out first, but yeah, do follow them everywhere. Really happy to have you both, as always, for the indigenous devs panels. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, you know who I am. As you know, I'm the guy who can't stop talking. I just like talking all day long. Silver Talk. No, I'm Silver Spook, and I am Neofeud 1 and 2's creator. And Neofeud 2, I don't have release dates. I'm trying to get it done as soon as humanly possible this year. And I will be featuring Decolonators in the Imaginative Festival, though, so you can play that. I already released the game this year, so I don't know what everyone's complaining about. 5 years. I made a game in 1 month. And so, anyways, but yeah, so thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Holly, for moderating. And yeah, you can we'll upload this panel with try to get all those links when we upload it to the YouTube channel if you miss it on the Twitch stream. And yeah, anyways, aloha and do your decolonial work, everybody. All right, and
Thank you.